Hi, so my name is Chris Kopek. I'm the lead fire effects monitor here at Rocky Mountain National Park. I have been here for 11 years in that role, and I work in the fire ecology program. It's a very small and specialized program. We have fire effects monitors and fire ecologists at all of our big parks throughout the United States, so like Rocky, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon. And then another part of my job is we're actually just embedded here at this park, so we actually work at many parks throughout Colorado, and we support their fire programs doing their fire ecology work as well. So I'm based out of Rocky, I also work at Great Sand Dunes down in southern Colorado, Florissant Fossil Beds, and then I work at Dinosaur National Monument. So we get to travel quite a bit throughout the year, while our main brunt of our workforce or our labor is here at Rocky Mountain National Park. We also spend a lot of time in our satellite parks as well. So it's not only important to study the ecological roles, it's because we're mandated to. So any park that has a fire program that they're doing either prescribed fire or fuels treatment like we saw earlier, it's actually a law that we're required to monitor the efficacy of those projects. So we're fuels funded, the same as the fire crew is, and we go out and we do a lot of the pre-planning for the fuels projects or for the prescribed fire. So we're collecting data pre and post burn and pre and post treatment to make sure that what we're doing is it right, is it wrong, and then we offer suggestions to our managers on how we can adjust that. So for us in the fire ecology program, we're really looking at like from a ground to the sky type of monitoring. So we're looking at surface fuels, so pine needles, pine cones, sticks on the ground, and then from there we're looking at the veg. So we're doing a lot of field botany, so a lot of our job is plant ID, and then from the plants then we go into the shrub component, the sagebrush that you see behind you, and then we monitor not only saplings, so new trees coming in, and then pole-sized trees, which are smaller diameter trees, and then we're doing overstory trees to the canopy, and we're monitoring everything in between. So the plot that we're in right now is actually we would call it a ponderosa pine savanna. So you see here the trees are very widely spaced apart. It's not a closed canopy. This is more indicative of what you would see in the lower montane areas of the park, with the sagebrush understory component. So a lot of the shrubs and then all the interspersed grasses, and you're going to get some of the other trees as well, but they're not going to be as common here, like the lodgepole, limber pines, occasionally a Doug fir, but primarily right here is our main tree that we're encountering when we're monitoring these plots is a ponderosa pine. Yeah, so especially for the ponderosa's evolved in a fire-adapted ecosystem. So a lot of the trees you see behind us, you see there's about a 6-foot range, and they historically they're a fire-prone tree, so they kind of rely on a natural regime of fire to come through here and then burn those lower branches. Their bark is not necessarily fire resistant, but they actually thrive in a fire-adapted ecosystem. And it's okay to, we get fire and it'll top kill some of these branches above me, but it doesn't kill the top of the tree. And that's what we want to avoid if we're implementing prescribed fire, or if we're in a wildfire situation. We want to keep the fire out of the top of the trees because they can handle low intensity fire on the ground. In fact, they love it. And then in our lodgepole forest, the lodgepole pine have a serotinous cone. Serotinous means it's that the cone, in order for the seed to germinate, that cone really needs like a specific heat temperature range. So when a fire burns through a lodgepole pine forest, they actually germinate more. So they germinate on their own typically, but they're really fire adapted. So they thrive after low intensity fire. So this area, I mean, all of the Rocky Mountains is a fire-adapted ecosystem, aside from the riparian areas, which would see infrequent fire, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. So, you know, the idea is to understand that we're while we don't currently live with fire, and wildfire is bad because we have homes in the woods, that's not necessarily what's right or necessary for the ecosystem to thrive. So our main goal here is to monitor the efficacy of our treatments, either mechanical or prescribed fire, and the main goal is that we will be able to return this to a natural fire regime in the future. The balance has been tipped in a lot of places because of fire suppression. So we're seeing a lot more fuel loading on the ground, and like when we were with the fuels crew, they're removing that fuel from the ground, they're building the piles, and we're able to control that, and we can remove that fuel in a safe manner, with the end goal being that we'll be able to, at some point in the future, return fire to the landscape, either by a prescribed fire, or we will be able to allow a natural fire, say a lightning strike fire, to do its thing on the landscape. A lot of the stuff we're looking for is like really heavy fuel loading on the ground. So a lot of jackstraw piles, trees on trees on trees laying on the ground in a kind of a Lincoln log style. And we do have a lot of those areas in the park, and a lot of the plots that we monitor are in areas of the park. And at that point, we're not able to really safely or efficiently put prescribed fire on the ground. So then, because that's not mimicking a historical fire regime, that's mimicking more of like a wildfire type scenario where you have a lot of fuel. The fire's going to burn hot. What it's going to do is it's going to kill the trees that are here. And our main goal is to keep the trees that are here alive, and then allow new trees of the appropriate species to come in and germinate and thrive. Here at Rocky, historically, this park wasn't necessarily a fireproof park, but there was about 80 to 100 years here where we weren't seeing a lot of fires in our fire history data. And we've had researchers come in on the east and the west side of the park and do tree ring coring to try to find some fire history, and we've got really good fire history maps for certain areas of the park. So we've got fires dating back to the 1200s in the park. And then there was a big gap from right around 1900 up until the 1990s where we weren't seeing any large-scale natural fires in the park, and that's primarily due to fire suppression. And because we've suppressed those fires, we've just seen an accumulation of fuels on the ground. And it's at that point where we need to really think about how we're going to move forward in the future with our fire management, and being able to return this area to a natural fire regime in a safe and controlled manner that also benefits the ecosystem. Yeah, 2020 was a big year for us. We had fires that actually started outside of the park on the northwest corner, and then on the western side of the park. And we saw exponential growth in those fires, and that's primarily due to the beetle kill that happened about 15 years ago. The bark beetle, which is a native species, took an opportune time with weather and climate and densely packed forest to really, the species really thrived and the trees really suffered from it. So we saw a lot of lodgepole forest over there. So what that did is all the trees died due to the bark beetles. So then we had all this fuel either on the ground or still standing, and it really created an avenue for fires to travel long distances. So the East Troublesome Fire, for instance, started over 40 miles to the west of the park, and within a couple days it burned not only onto the west side, but it was actually throwing spots 1.5 miles over tundra into the eastern side of the park, and it found an available fuel source high up in the subalpine and the winds that we had during the winter when we're seeing those big weather patterns shifting and the Chinook winds, found an available fuel source, and it found an avenue down the canyon and burned into the park. And we burned in the park alone, about 27,000 acres burned from the East Troublesome fire and then the Cameron Peak fire to the north. And those were the two largest fires in Colorado history. A lot of our fires here are wind-driven fires. So, when you factor in the fuels, weather, and topography, when you get the fire triangle together, and it was just a perfect storm of we had the available fuels, we had the winds, and we had the dry, low RH relative humidity weather. And when a fire really gets a head of steam on it, there's not much you can do to put a stop to it.
But obviously makes your work all the more important to assess it before it happens.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing out here today. Is we're looking at this plot. This plot, like I said, is a ponderosa pine savanna plot that we have. We have about 6 different types of plots in the park. We have a lodgepole plot. We have closed ponderosa forest. We have a mixed conifer forest, and like the one that we're in right now. This plot, the history of this plot for us is this plot was installed in 1998, and it was burned. This whole landscape behind me was burned in the year 2000, and then it was burned again in 2008. So we're here today doing a 15-year post-burn read on this plot, and that's a lot of what our job is. Our job, so us as fire effects monitors, we're looking at really 2 different things. We're looking at first order fire effects, and first order fire effects are going to be, what does the landscape look like right now? What is the weather doing at the time of a burn, and what did the burn do to that landscape? So we're measuring the fuels pre-burn. So we have a baseline number, and then we're coming in during the fire. We're monitoring the fire weather, we're monitoring rates of spread, and we're looking at fire behavior, and we're looking at what the smoke is doing as well. And then immediately post-burn, we're going to come back to this plot, and then we're going to look at what did the fire do? How did it impact the trees? What's the burn severity on the ground, and how much fuel was reduced? And that's going to be your first order fire effects. And then what we're doing today are second order fire effects. So we're looking at long-term trends and how that fire affects this particular landscape over time. And we do that up to about 20 years post-burn. And ideally, we'd like to come in and do that multiple times over. So when we're starting to do our post-burn reads, we'll do an immediate post-burn. So that would be right after the fire. Then we'll come back a year later. Then we'll come back 2 years later, and then after that we'll come 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And at any time, if we decide that we want to burn this again, we can do that. We can burn this a 3rd time, and then it will reset, and then we'll start that process over again. So we're looking at tree mortality a lot. Did we top kill the trees, or the trees, did the fire have any negative impacts on the trees, or is there no impact to the trees? And then what we're doing out here today is we're really looking at the vegetation response, and we're looking at species composition and species diversity. So we're going along the transects behind me, and we're going at predetermined intervals, and we're IDing the grasses and the shrubs and the forbs, 2 species. So it's a lot of botany, a lot of plant ID out here. There's no real difficulty. This is a wonderful job. I get to work outside every day. I mean, this is a lot of people's dream job, and I'm so fortunate to be here, and to be outside all day long. This is my office. I have the Rocky Mountains, and I think the most difficult part is the weather, because we just can't plan. We just can't plan for the weather, and the weather. Our big concern out here is lightning. So we're constantly looking at the weather before we come out here, and then we're constantly evaluating it while we're here. And the hardest part is to make that decision that, hey, we need to not be here anymore. And that's, at the end of the day, it's not worth getting injured over, so it'll be here tomorrow.
What is your favorite part of your job?
I think my favorite part of the job is we travel. We get to travel a lot. I think in my career, I've worked at 37 different park units doing fire ecology. Um, sometimes we just travel there for a few days. Sometimes we're there for a couple weeks, up to a month. We get to go anywhere from Alaska. Um, I've been all states, all over the West, all over the East, up to Alaska, Hawaii, doing fire ecology, and it's different everywhere we go. We have the same like baseline protocols, but they're tailored to that specific region. So I think that's really fun, the diversity of what we get to see. And obviously we're firefighters as well, so we could get a radio call at any time and say, hey, we need to respond to a fire, and we usually drop what we're doing and we will go. So I got my college degree in ecology and natural history, and I had a career path as a botanist. I was going to be a field botanist, and I worked for different state NGOs for a little while. And what really tipped the balance for me was a lot of the places that I was interested in and the natural communities that I was really passionate about turned out to be fire adapted communities. So I got my start in the Ozarks in the central U.S. Really high botanical diversity there, and a lot of those ecosystems there are also fire adapted in a different way. So I started getting more into the fire ecology side of things and looking at the plants from more of like not just like what's here, but it's like what's here now. What happens if we apply fire to the landscape, and then what's coming back afterwards. And seeing those species as really, some of those more rare and charismatic species thrive in natural communities is what really kind of fueled my passion. And no, it's just a really fun job. We get to do so much. We're not just out. We're not out there to just look at plants. We get to look at the entire landscape as a whole, and we get to look at it from so many different facets. Be it the fuels monitoring. We also, like I said, we're also firefighters as well. So we do run chainsaws, we do cut down trees, we do participate in fire suppression, we do participate in prescribed fire. I know what my favorite thing is. I already thought of this earlier when you asked the other folks. My favorite aspect of what I do in my job is I really like going to wilderness fires, wildfires that were caused by probably lightning would be the natural cause of that. And I really like being in a landscape where we can just watch that fire do its thing on the landscape and burn naturally without putting any suppression in effect, and watching the fire behavior and looking at the weather and what the weather's doing and how it's influencing it, and looking at the fuel types and how that fire moves through the landscape, and just being able to sit on the top of a mountain and observe that is probably the favorite part of my job.